public comment, but we may direct the county manager or others to follow up on any of the items that are raised. So today we will start with Lorena Bader, and again, we're as usual limited to 2 minutes for each speaker during public comment.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
In education, we call what you see with Jose Santiago in the beginning of these meetings a dog and pony show. It doesn't reflect reality at Maricopa County Animal Care and Control. Today, we will give you a glimpse of the incompetence and ineptitude of the shelter's upper management. The hiring process has been manipulated so that Mary Martin's friends have been given the top positions at the high end of the pay scale instead of hiring the most qualified candidates for the positions. The results are lacking accountability for the hours managers show up or for their job performance, rarely working weekends or helping when the shelter is short-staffed, using time at the shelter to work on personal business, rarely walking into the kennel buildings other than for a photo shoot, not being prepared for big adoption events, doing little to help, and typically not even attending, punitive disciplinary practices, a frontline turnover rate over 50%, dogs sitting in their kennels for days, sometimes weeks without getting out to exercise, a shelter that runs out of food and enrichment items, backstabbing, sabotage, fighting, and unprofessional behavior amongst themselves. You were provided with an independent assessment detailing how toxic the environment is for the employees. Mary Martin, Human Resources, and the Maricopa County Management have been informed numerous times about these and many other issues. According to employees and volunteers, little to nothing has been done, and many of you seem dismissive of the findings. If you aren't certain they are valid, then it is your responsibility to gather more information. My suggestion would be to create a citizens oversight committee and to order an independent audit of the entire shelter system. What will it take for you to understand that you have a serious problem? A suicide by a bullied employee? A fatal mauling by a dangerous dog? A newspaper reporter who exposes the truth? A class action lawsuit filed against Maricopa County? I predict that this house of cards is going to fall. It is up to you to determine if you will go down with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Next, we have Andrea Alden.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The Mejorando report presented a scathing indictment of shelter management and the toxic workplace climate they have created. Today, I want to focus on some issues specific to the East Shelter. As mentioned in the report, Mary Martin rarely visits the East Shelter. Although there is a shelter manager for the East location, she is largely unsupervised. Here are just a few observations. It would seem reasonable to expect the shelter manager to be at the shelter close to 40 hours a week, but that's not happening. Her typical workday begins somewhere between 9:30 and 10 a.m. and ends between 4 and 5 p.m. with an hour taken for lunch. Much of her time on site is spent in her office, frequently with the door closed. She's been pursuing credentials through the Academy for Dog Trainers for the last year, so it's not uncommon for her to have a sign on her door asking that she not be disturbed because she's doing webinars and assignments for her training. Often, the meet and greet yards are filthy, adoption wait times are long, and the staff lack training. East has been consistently short-handed, yet the shelter manager does not come in to all big adoption events or step in to assist staff during busy times. There's a need to improve adoption processes during big adoption events and even on a day-to-day basis, but areas of need continue to be ignored. It is also a double standard to expect frontline staff to stay late, work overtime, or be punctual when the shelter manager does none of those things. As for an example of bullying, on February 4th of this year, there was a discussion in one of the private Facebook groups for volunteers about the euthanasia protocols at the East Shelter, which is a perfectly reasonable concern for volunteers to want to address. Rather than address the volunteers' concerns, the East Shelter manager added her fiancé to the group so he could come to her defense. Please keep in mind that her fiancé is neither an employee nor a volunteer at Animal Care and Control. He verbally attacked the volunteers, going so far as to reveal the full name of a volunteer who uses a pseudonym on Facebook due to her employment with the county prosecutor's office. Moments after the fiancé outed the volunteer, the shelter manager posted a message of support for him on her own personal Facebook page, encouraging his bullying behavior. As you might guess, Mary Martin did nothing about this. The double standards for management, staff, and volunteers are very real and very damaging. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Next is Kathleen Bow.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am continuing to report the incompetency and laziness of upper management at MCAC from my work there while I observed it daily. The shelter manager, being paid $84,000 a year, is knowledgeable on computer work, but was asked months ago to redo the kennel cards. Instead, he hides in his office and verbally harasses the workers. He is never seen out helping or working with the animals unless he's forced to. To my horror, I watched him come into an office to request help to unload a shipment from a female employee who could hardly walk due to extreme back nerve pain. The animal behavior person, making $88,000 a year, should be helping to provide accurate information on kennel cards, help with adoptions, mentoring volunteers, and staff to handling challenging dogs and assuring that her team has the resources to do their job. A couple of weeks ago, they were down to milk bones and peanut butter until Lorena and the 501c3 Four Paws stepped in to provide a huge amount of enrichment supplies. Her job description requires good communication skills and doesn't include yelling, harassing, throwing things, or making people cry from humiliation. The PIO sits in his office scrolling through Facebook unless he's being filmed. If he takes an animal to an event, he makes sure someone else cleans and grooms it. He spends his time gossiping, creating drama, and giving details of his love life. You told him you have his back. You should have the backs of the people who work at the shelter and actually care about the animals. I believe you need to have an independent consultant come in and audit the entire operation to include the finances. I know there are steps being put in place to revamp the volunteer program, which is a total disaster, to try to improve the workplace culture and to track and account for donations. If you don't demand changes from the top, you're not going to be successful. And keep in mind, the only reason these people continue to work there and keep these jobs is because they are friends of Mary Martin. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Next is Erica Edmark.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Any good shelter manager will tell you that one of the essentials for being successful and efficient is a great volunteer program. To quote an employee at Pima, the end goal is saving lives, and the only way to do that is to work collaboratively with staff, volunteers, and community stakeholders. Compared to progressive shelters like PAC, the MCACC volunteer program is not up to the standards that it should or could be. Some information on the current volunteer program. Weeks after submitting their application, new volunteers must attend an orientation, which takes approximately 4 hours. They are not allowed to interact with dogs for 16 hours. Instead, they must spend that time doing laundry or cleaning up poop. If they haven't quit by the time they reach their quota, they must then spend 2 more hours being trained to handle dogs. This is a huge factor, but definitely not the only factor when it comes to figuring out why this program is struggling. I did a public records request for the volunteer hours completed by new volunteers between March, the starting date of the current volunteer coordinator, and 10/22, the date of my request. Of the 233 volunteers who attended orientation, at least 46% quit immediately or almost immediately. Only 30% were able to handle level 1 dogs, taking an average of 40 days to achieve that. Only 32% had volunteered in the prior month. The national volunteer retention rate is around 65%, and Pima's is about 70%. After Pima's initial info sessions, which are done twice a month, accommodating up to 50 people per session, a separate dog handling class is 3 hours. Then they are assigned an experienced volunteer mentor who monitors and approves their dog handling status. That's another drastic difference between MCACC and a progressive, well-functioning shelter like PAC. The employees trust, value, and utilize their volunteers. I suspect that plays a big part in why their volunteers stick around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Haley James Hannigan.
Morning.
Good morning.
Every time I come and speak here, I tell my kids about it. I have 4 children, each with their own level of understanding of the situation at MCACC. 3 of them have volunteered there. I show them the video of the speeches, and my youngest child, who's 7, after watching my speech to you, she usually asks, "Mama, why are you so angry?" How do I explain this to a child? How do I get her to understand all of the complicated details behind my anger? I have been at a loss for weeks about just what to say to her. I don't know. Life's unfair? That's just a blanket statement that could be easily applied, but it doesn't do this fight justice. I don't know how to explain that the elected officials sworn to speak for their citizens ignore them instead. So I choose to tell my daughter that when she sees an injustice or a situation that cries out for help, that she has the power to set her feet and push for change, to stick up for the bullied, to be a voice for the voiceless. Every time I talk with my children about what's happening, I am reminded of the Lorax and my favorite quote from Dr. Seuss. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. I wonder how you explain your choices to your children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Ed Bufford with a little holiday cheer for us.
Should I take this hat off to be appropriate to address the board?
Feel free to leave it on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, Merry Christmas. It's 2 weeks away, but next time I see you, it'll be 2020. I've learned you can't say a whole lot in 2 minutes, but I don't really have a whole lot to say at this particular meeting. 4 meetings ago, I did go from here to 301. And I sat in the cafeteria and I called a few people and left messages or talked to their aides and picked up some business cards to update my board members list, asking for a response at each person that I contacted, which wasn't everybody, but I didn't hear back from anyone. I have for a long time tried to follow a chain of command, especially regarding a law that already exists. Because we have a law that already exists. Now, I'm sure that you are also frustrated when a law is passed umpteen years ago and everybody says it's unenforceable. That seems to be what this law is like. I've tried to go through the chain of command, but my New Year's resolution is to get the dog license law enforced in some way, some effort, any effort. And I've been going through the chain of command, and I've had long meetings with a couple of key people who seem very supportive. I've volunteered to start a volunteer group, to be a community educator, and to try to increase that percentage. If 10% additional dogs had an ID that have no type of ID, it should reduce the intake at the shelter by about 6,000. And it's less than that amount that are being euthanized. Who knows? Maybe as a marketing teacher, I could actually say to people, we got the demand at the shelter to be higher than the supply that causes some animals to have to be euthanized. Anyway, I volunteered for that. I'm still waiting for a response from one person, and I'm going to keep working on it, but I just want to say my New Year's resolution is to write op-eds or just do everything that I can as an individual person to try to actually accomplish something regarding this issue. Because a lot of other people don't make it a high priority, but you know what? It's already a law. Let's try to enforce it, see what happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming and speaking today. This is the time when we have the opportunity to speak up here on the dais. Ms. Rich, any comments? Supervisor